Om Devim Prasanam Pranatarti Hantrim Yogendra Pujam Jugadharma Patrim Tam Sharadam Bhakti Vigyana Datrim Dayaswarupam Pranamami Nityam. Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. O Shardada, propitious goddess, killer of misery in souls resigned, savior of religion in every age, by saints and sages worshipped, O Mother kind. Give us love and wisdom, thou, O grace incarnate, to thee we bow. Om peace, peace, peace. May Brahman protect us, may Brahman sustain us, may Brahman illumine our thinking process. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat. Subject of my talk today is Sri Sharda Devi and her spiritual transmission. She is my guru's guru, so she is my Parama Guru and the mother of Ramakrishna order and of course of our SRV associations here, which were founded under the auspice of Lex Hickson, who is a devotee of Swami Nikhilananda, also who was a child of Holy Mother. So here at Thanksgiving, it's a very, very great blessing and wonderful to be able to speak about her and to talk about how she transmitted wisdom to her children, to her precious spiritual children. So we want to go as deep into that subject as possible and take at least 2 classes to do that. We might find that after the seminar, which is 2 Sundays away now, which we're going to be talking about India's 2 great secrets, non-duality and Divine Mother, that this series of classes could extend longer and we could dive deeper around that subject of this great secret of Divine Mother and Mother worship, sometimes called Shakta Advaita Vedanta. That is the worship of non-duality, the worship of Divine Mother reality inside of the, under the umbrella of or with the backdrop of non-duality. Because it reminds me that in one conversation between Holy Mother after Sri Ramakrishna had passed, and she was more well known as the mother of the Ramakrishna order, that one of the devotees in a conversation with her asked her about the status of the devotees. You'd have to try and understand that this great manifestation of God they call avatars had come and had brought with him, that is Sri Ramakrishna had brought with him the Divine Mother of the universe in the form of his wife, his spiritual consort and wife, and Swami Vivekananda had come, and 16 direct disciples, who were many of them known as Ishvarakotis, or great realized souls in their own right, had all come together at this one period of time with Sri Ramakrishna's advent on earth. So after he had passed and the order wasn't fully formulated yet, it would probably fall upon, the question would probably fall upon people's minds. I found Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother in my life. So what does that make me inside of India's philosophical schools and sampradayas and so forth? I mean, am I a dualist? Do I follow Ramanuja? Do I fall under the adherent of Sri Ramanuja's qualified non-dualism? Just what am I when I'm a devotee of Sri Ramakrishna and I've taken his mantra? So this question came up in the company of Holy Mother, and she said, Sri Ramakrishna was an Advaitist, non-dualist, therefore all of you are also Advaitists. So a very powerful and direct statement to clarify the question in this mind of the devotee about the status of the not only philosophical but the religious status of people who were beginning to flock to Sri Ramakrishna in that time. Now some 5 million people have come since the time he has passed his Mahasamadhi, and probably more and growing all the time. And Holy Mother was there after he passed to usher in many of these souls and give them initiation. The monastics and the devotees all found a home with this new divine couple. So it was a very beautiful time, but not without its difficulties in its growth period, where people would begin to wonder about their status when the old gods were still all there. And the worshippers of Shiva, the Shaivites, worshippers of Vishnu, the Vaishnavas, the worshippers of Ganesha, and the different levels of philosophy too, Madhva, Ramanuj, Shankara. All of these were vying, as it were, for India's attention at a time when Christianity was being brought into India, into the picture by the English, and a lot of these sampradayas were beginning to question if they should keep their fealty to India's ancient ways, which of course we're glad they did and should. But there were a lot of factors competing for the hearts and minds of people at the time. So I'm starting off this little series of classes this way to give us that perspective, because a statement by Holy Mother so direct, saying, you, Sri Ramakrishna, was an Advaitist, and so you're also an Advaitist, is not just for clarifying the doubts of one devotee, but it's a very interesting statement in and of itself, because it shows that Advaita isn't stripped of or exclusive of dualistic worship or qualified dualistic wisdom. That's called Advaita and Vishishta Advaita. So those are to be carried on, as you saw Sri Ramakrishna himself doing when he worshipped Mother Kali in the Dakhinesha temple in those early days, before the order even gathered around him. And while Holy Mother was still young, a very young woman, just fresh on the scene. So in the press of all of this, then, it shows us that Advaita is not, when you become an Advaitist or a non-dualist, that doesn't mean that you let go of the other rungs of the ladder, you might say. Swamiji said himself later, it's one of my great discoveries about Indian philosophy in this lifetime, he was talking about, that a person goes up the ladder inward by steps, starting as practicing dualistic rituals with devotion to God with form, and then ascending to the next step of hearing the Dharma and the teachings at the qualified non-dualistic level, where it's qualified because you haven't reached the highest stage of realization, where all words drop away and a being has samadhi, non-dual samadhi, and sees only the light of Brahman, and then the worlds and wisdom and knowledge itself slips away, sort of like it does in deep sleep with very learned people at nighttime in this lifetime. And then you're just aware of this great light within, and you're merged in it, like a hailstone in an ocean, Shankara used to say. So giving you kind of a picture that Swamiji talked about, his great discovery is that people proceed from dualism to qualified non-dualism to Advaita non-dualism. But he added to it that when a person reaches that Advaitic rung of the ladder, like he sometimes described them as stepping stones across a river, that you could then use those same stepping stones to get back across the river to help people who are still at the dualistic level. And many religions, of course, in the time of Sri Ramakrishna and Swamiji, were still functioning very much and specifically and exclusively at the dualistic level. They were going, like here in the West, when Swamiji arrived, they were pretty much going under the doctrines of salvation and grace. And India had always thought in terms of sadhana and liberation. That is, you qualify yourself and you understand the teachings at the qualified level, and then you use an example like your Buddha or your Jesus or your Krishna or your Ramakrishna to ascend to the non-dualistic level and merge there, because you're now prepared for that. So that means you'd be using self-effort then to get to this non-dual realization, to realization of your birthless, deathless nature, or beyond time and space, and partless and indivisible, and transcendent of all things in the realm of name and form. So all of these are learned by the soul in the philosophies of India. So they're very important to keep track of. And in that regard, it could also be said that once one realizes the non-dual level, in order to come back down the stairs, then they're going to have to take this very wisdom that they learned on the stepping stone or on the rung of the ladder that preceded Advaita to help others. So we saw Swami Vivekananda doing that. He was very much an Advaitist and non-dualist, but he had this deep, burning love for his guru, Sri Ramakrishna, and so he had a very deep bhakti and divine love for him, and also for Holy Mother, whom we're talking about mainly today and next Sunday. So this sort of sets the scene of this conversation that she had with the devotee about the non-dual premise of everything that lies behind Sri Ramakrishna, Sri Sharda Devi, Swami Vivekananda, the Ramakrishna order, this SRV chapter of it in the West, and all of us as devotees here in the West, as we take up this topic of Sri Sharda Devi, who is my Parma Guru, and whom I heard so many teachings about from my Guru, Swami Asheshanandaji Maharaj. May peace and blessings always be upon him. So in this hour or hour and a little more, we'll have to look into this subject of Holy Mother and her transmission, how she taught in such a special way. It wasn't like the traditional guru-disciple relationship all the time. She was very spontaneous and very straightforward, and sometimes just stated the simple truth right offhand and gave it straight to people that way. Of course, she was around people who were operating mainly at the bhakti level and were depending very heavily on devotion to God as their main yoga. And then she also had the monks around her of the Ramakrishna order, and some very astute beings and some very intellectual householders. And they were, of course, operating quite from the station of jnanam or wisdom. And of course everyone was doing the karma yoga work in order to be successful in life. At a time it was very difficult for India. And then meditation also came to the fore. So I think I can premise this whole class by saying that when I reflected upon Holy Mother this time, meaning for this set of classes, because I'm thinking about her all the time, that I did so with a mind to see what stood out about her transmission to me. I think if we mention things that are natural to the path, like bhakti, devotion, and worship of the Guru, which she held sacrosanct, she was 100% behind Sri Ramakrishna and thought the highest of him and knew him to be the divine incarnation of the age. And so there was absolutely no doubt in her mind, what to speak of doubt. There was all positive assurance that this was the divine incarnation of the age. And she herself would sometimes come out with a startling statement about, though her divinity was often veiled with the disguise of a simple village woman, that she would come out and proclaim that the Divine Mother was right there in her presence, like represented by her form. So she was an incarnation of the Divine Mother of the universe. All of these, as we look back on the writings and the memories of the order that's still very young, came forward. And so we'd have to probably say first that we have to look very seriously at those, which are the major underpinnings of any good path, any path that holds yoga or union as being the highest, union with God. But then after that, then the nuts and bolts of what she taught would be interesting to look at. So when I looked at them, although there are bound to be more that she mentioned, I thought she was here on earth quite often to teach us or remind us of the principles of reincarnation and karma. So she would mix in teachings on reincarnation and karma into what she said. And of course in India this is a staid and settled fact that they just accept reincarnation and karma, whereas in the West people aren't including that in the philosophy, if the philosophy even is considered in a more fundamentalist or dualistic religion. So those two would be right away things that we heard her talk about, because even in India they were getting confused about their incarnations and trying to trace themselves back to the great beings that were their ancestors and the ancestors of their ancestors when this idea of Western science through the English was upon them, and they were beginning, there's doubt beginning to be cast upon this idea of many lifetime theory, or principle would probably be better to say. Along with that, she accented mantra. So if there was a bondage that was there in the mind, the human mind, doubt, as I just mentioned, and fear of livelihood and losing body and attachment to the senses, if all of these things were there, which were mentioned all the time, then she very much stood for us and promoted the mantra, the practice of japa, as one of the main things. And the other thing that the fourth thing that she came through with quite often was sadhana. So she was accenting the need for not just taking a savior, but as a means to salvation in heaven, but for actually using this great soul as an exemplar, as a means for liberation, by doing one's own sadhana. So that's why Sri Ramakrishna was so full of teachings himself, him being a non-dualist, but coming down every day to the qualified non-dualistic level to give out so many teachings, even all the way down, like Buddha and Jesus did, to stories and fables inside of the culture that they were in, to illustrate spiritual teachings. What we were talking about last Sunday in terms of many of the God blogs we're talking about, some 300 or 400 of these teachings of Sri Ramakrishna that we've been diving into together every weekend to look at in that Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana kind of way that India does. First you hear it, you roll it over in your mind and contemplate it, and then you realize what's there at the depths of it and work that into your life. So that's a four-part movement, really, when you come down to it. So those four things is what I'm going to stay with this particular class. We're going to look at some teachings that came from her own lips, so that we can remind ourselves, particularly in a Western country, of the importance of knowing origins of things. If you're a non-dualist, then you've probably heard and maybe even realized the truth of non-origination. So we're going to put that as a backdrop now on the side as we look into the need for knowing what they call in Sanskrit utpatti, or the origins of projected things. That is, everything that came from the mind of God has found its way into the realm of name, form, time, and space, and cause and effect, which are actually the 5 elements of what they call Maya in India. Maya is what veils and what distorts. And Maya can also, if used in the right way, be used to reveal. So you've got the distorting, you've got the veiling power, you've got the distorting power, and you've got the revelatory power. And all of that can be found if one is willing to search deep enough in the realm of Maya. It's name and form and time and space to Vedanta looks a little different than name, form, and time and space in Tantra, how it looks there. In one way, they will deify it and try and use it to get through it. And in the Vedantic way, you'll look at it and use it to try and transcend the limitation in it. So the Tantra and the Vedanta, the two great streams, I've often called them, flowing right from the heart of the Divine Mother, are there for the temperament to choose. And then for each sadhaka, that is practitioner, to utilize, to either see through Maya or go beyond Maya, really amounts to the same thing in the end. So both Tantra and Vedanta agree upon this, is that one has to reach that ultimate state of consciousness that they refer to as Brahman, and find one's connection with it, the Atman with Brahman, or the Jivatman with the Paramatman. So different ways of saying that, and the methods a little different, but the wisdom behind them very much concurrent and agreeing with one another. So with that as a kind of preamble that I like to give for these subjects each time we give a series of classes, let's take up first what she said about karma and reincarnation, because those are very important to this day and age. Like I say, in India, they just take these almost for granted that this is the case of the thing. So you might be conversing or talking in holy company with, in a company of different teachers and different groups of followers, and they'll be talking as if reincarnation and karma is just a relative truth. There's nothing to doubt about it. There's nothing to speculate about it. It's actually been going on in relativity for many lifetimes. In fact, so much so that a lot of the practitioners are thinking, how do I get beyond this? So this kind of thinking brought about the whole monastic stream of how to get free, leading right up to Buddhism and beyond, where you had to get free of samsara and into a state of nirvana. And looking at both of these, the real and the unreal, the sat and the asat, the changing and the unchanging, became a real focus for whole groups of striving individuals whose main purpose was to get beyond the worlds. So that has to be said hand in hand with this, along with this subject of karma and reincarnation, that one looks at it not just to say, for instance, oh, I was once, the Queen of Scotland, or I was once a street sweeper somewhere in a country, in a far eastern country, 500, 600, 700 lives ago. All of that, of course, is speculative. But what's really important about the teaching is that it brings you to the present moment more, and it helps you account for all the things that you're suffering right now, and it helps you fulfill all your aspirations of everything that you're desiring. Of course, this is another thing that she talked about, legitimate desires and illegitimate desires, how one will free you and how the other one will bind you. So your aspirations have to be fulfilled, let's put it that way. So when it came down to her teachings, she was very much in knowledge of the people who were around her. Some of these were simple villagers when she went back to her own village home. Others were city dwellers in Calcutta, and or I should say Kolkata. And basically she had very much different kinds of people around her, and many of them in doubt about their own religion, as I said, and they were looking for solutions for their sufferings. And she had, known for her great compassion, did as much as she could for them. And so amongst the teachings that she gave to those people who were looking for solutions and would actually practice sadhana, because she used to say, they come to me asking for boons, they come to me asking to have a vision of Sri Ramakrishna, but where's their yearning for God? I don't see that in them. So she knew simultaneously that a qualified student, if she saw one of those amongst them, she would go, oh, there's a qualified student. Finally, we see one coming forward. So a lot of the Hindu people at the time were not thinking very deeply, philosophically. They'd lost a lot of ground since the ancient times in India with the rishis, who were complete knowers of Brahman and were passing that wisdom on to others of their time. So she saw this predicament in them, and she saw that they were in bondage, and so she would immediately revert to the teachings so prevalent in India called yoga. So she had, later on, they figured out that what she was doing, and I'll show you a chart on it. She was teaching from two different kinds of yogas which were specific to Divine Mother reality. One was called Mano-Buddhi yoga, is that you got the mind and the intellect to join with each other, and when you awakened and refined the intellect, it took Mano, the mind, and made it one-pointed again. And so this is one yoga which the Matri avatar, we like to call her sometimes, she was using all the time, and trying to get people to use their mind to pull themselves out of bondage. And so that was an important teaching. And in that regard, she used to talk about the need to control the senses. So I'm going to put this chart up here for you to look at. And I think before I take the quotes, I want to just show you the pyramid here that's in this image. At the foot of the horses you see across there the five elements. So taking stock of earth, air, fire, water, and ether, or if you want to put those in a kind of order from gross to subtle, earth first, water second, fire third, air fourth, and ether fifth, in order of subtlety, that is gross to subtle. So earth is the grossest element, water is next the subtlest, and then fire is subtler, air is subtler, and then ether is the subtlest of all. So all these five elements are to be taken stock of according to the father of yoga, Patanjali, and meditated upon. You might say then flash forward to the contemporary time with the Westerner, where we're looking at the five elements as something to manipulate, something to possess, something to study from only an intellectual level. But in India, these five elements are called the Mahapancha Bhutas. So they're the five great elements. So they look at them with great reverence, even though they are not sentient in and of themselves. They nevertheless have this order of what we're talking about, origins here, from external to internal. The more you study the five elements, the more you shift vibration. And this shift of vibration is going to be very important when you dissolve earth in your thinking process into water, and you dissolve the two of those, earth and water, into fire, and fire consumes those. And then the three of those, you dissolve them, that is earth, water, and fire, into air, and you realize everything's becoming much subtler here and even much more formless. And then you take all four of those elements, that is earth, water, fire, and air, and you dissolve them into ether. So it's not a matter of does ether exist or not, or, you know, I end up with only four elements like some systems have done, but ether got to be contemplated very deeply In other words, space. And the important move to that was there was something called an inner space that people weren't looking at for whole millennia at a time. Like for 2,000 years, you might say, since the great time of the great rishis, except for a very few enlightened souls who were remembering this origin of everything back to its source. That is an inner life, what Jesus called an internal life or inner life. They were remembering this from century to century. Other people were forgetting it, and they weren't accounting for the 5 elements and how one comes out of the other, and how all 5 then work themselves back into 5 kinds of space. So if you want to talk about space in India, and you have a Samkhya scientist, or you have an illumined soul, or an acharya of a sampradaya, or a great guru, then they'll have plenty to say about ether that is not available to people in Western world. The word there would be akasha. So you're taking up these 5 elements as all being dissolved back into their source. Earth into water, those 2 into fire, those 3 into air, those 4 into ether. And then you arrive at ether, and you've done that not just by a scientific study, because there you're looking only at the outer expression of things, but you've done that by an accounting of how things came out from a source of origin and manifested themselves externally. So there's the why of how all of this appeared, how all of this appears to the 5 senses, which we're getting to. So these 5 elements are now arrive at the 5 subtle types of space. There's a space right now that we're all in where our bodies occupy and where the objects in the room occupy. It's called Bhutakasha. And then a subtler space for that to dissolve that into is called Pranakasha, which is the energy that's running through all these things externally. That's called Pranakasha. Then you take those 2 akashas, those 2 types of space, physical and let's call it vital or life force, and you dissolve them back into the space of the mind. And that's called, well, you could call it Manokasha, but quite often they call it Gyanakasha, back into the space of intelligence. Oh, now we start to have answers for where everything has come from and how it's come into its present shape. So you're not anymore taking anything for granted. You're not anymore in doubt about how you came here. And this is going to lead up to the end of doubt about who you are. Because as you take all of the things back into yourself, and Holy Mother would explain these in very simple ways to people, but these were in their thinking process, so it wasn't hard to convince them of this or to cause them to remember this. Whereas in the West, you do have to try and convince people of this. It's a different kind of biology that you want to get into. It's Samkhya science, not physical material science or physics per se. So all of this is done with the orientation of you're trying to find the source of the origin of every little thing. Even things that begin to disappear to the 5 senses, as we will see by this chart. So I'm already just talking about the 5 elements and the 5th element, ether, and how you can dissolve those first 3 ethers of physical space, energy, and thought, then back into intelligence, and from intelligence back into what they call Chid Akasha. That's the 5th kind of space. And when you find the 5th kind of space, that's where mind stops thinking, where intellect turns off, where wisdom doesn't there isn't a need for wisdom and ignorance anymore. Sounds non-dual to me, right? So you begin to take this inward journey called inward ascension, based on the original divine wisdom, Adi Daiva Vidya, that the rishis gave you so many millennia ago in India, and all coming out of this non-dual state. But that just begins to connect us then to these first 10 tattvas. These are called tattvas, or principles. So you can see how each of these in the chart connect back up to their source. Earth goes with smelling, water goes with tasting, fire goes with seeing, of course, air goes with feeling, ether goes with hearing. So this is the 5 senses of knowledge, and how their emanations are the 5 elements. So the meditation, and this is even corroborated and accented by Patanjali, the father of yoga, when he composed the 8-limb system, this time around in 140 AD around, he was telling you to use these 10 as stations of meditation. The word in India is called, in Sanskrit, it's called alambana. It's something you concentrate on to get the essence from. So I guess back to my point here is we're not concentrating on earth to get the essence from it, nor fire, nor air, nor ether. This is why Shankara likes to sing in the stotram. You know, I'm not air, I'm not fire, I'm not ether, I'm not the gross body, I'm not the subtle body. I am pure conscious awareness. I am Shiva, I am Shiva. It's called the Nirvana Shatkamar, or the stotram on non-dual awareness. So great souls have then taken this system, this ancient system, and turned it into I'm not, I'm not, I'm not, which is a famous path, as most of you know, called Neti Neti. Until you can find a place where iti, I am, I am, I am. So I'm not all this, leads you to I am that. This and that have a nice separation between them based on practice, based on taking everything inside to its source. So we would say penultimately, and you'll see next what comes, is mind. Let's put the prana on hold for a second, because it's not listed as a tattva. It's a connecting force that's very much akin to what they call Shakti, or power, dynamic power. But you could see the next great station in the ascension, or inward ascension, of the tattvas is the mind itself. Mano buddhi hamkara. Mano buddha hamkara chittani naham is how that's put by the great seers. I'm not the mind, I'm not the intellect, I'm not the ego, I'm not the mind's thoughts. Chittani naham. What am I then? I am pure conscious awareness. I am Shiva is the conclusion. So that's how each one of these verses ends. I could sing these for you. Wait for the recording on it, because we're probably going to record it and put it on YouTube so that everyone gets to see how this great system works and what the grand conclusion of it is. Basically 3 words: I am that, or that thou art. Well, you can see here there's some, just like they were connecting linchpins between the 5 elements and the 5 senses, and now we've accounted for them, and we're saying these are all in the mind. Let's not just look at a picture and say, nice, I have a list. But let's say, this is actually all coming from mind. The origin of earth, fire, water, air, and ether, the origin of tasting, touching, hearing, seeing, smelling is back in my mind. It's not upstairs somewhere in the heavens. It's not left, it's not right. It's all come from its source of origin, called the mind. So if you go into the mind, you'll find out that the mind has a waking state, and then it has a dreaming state, and then it has a deep sleep state. Consciousness is changing vibrations as it gets operated by this antaha karana, mind, intellect, thoughts, and ego, sense of I, the ego. That's what the mind is here, and the chitta is not seen in this. This is from Sri Krishna's eightfold mind. So basically, following on the old Samkhya, you can see that there's connecting linchpins between the 5 senses and the fourfold mind. 5 of those are called pranas, and actually Vivekananda said that's actually 1 prana in 5 forms. So there's the power of prana, which is just called life force itself. It's flowing in everything, in nature, in bodies, in nerves, in vessels. in rivers and canyons. Everything is being caused to flow by this subtle power called prana, which, by the way, Vivekananda said when he came here to the West in the late 1800s, oh, they haven't found out about the prana yet, nor have they found out about the tanmatras. So in our philosophy, whether it be religious philosophy or biology or scientific philosophy, we hadn't accounted for the obvious because it was unseen. That's the drawback or the downside to thinking that if it isn't seen, it doesn't exist. You know what I'm talking about here? God, Brahman, reality. Since you cannot see it, or it's veiled by everything, then you conclude that it doesn't exist. And that's, of course, the ignorant way out. That's the coward's way out. To have to be fearless and to face things is to see that all of this is a manifestation of that. Means you need to connect these linchpins back to the source. So this is a meditation people do that connects everything by first taking account of it in fives. It's actually called a quintuplication process in English these days. I put out a small book on that called the quintuplication, Cosmic Quintuplications. So it shows you how you can remember these things by sets of fives. You have like 5 fingers, you have 5 toes, you have 5 senses. There's so many fives, it's kind of ridiculous to overlook them. Is it just an accident that happened, that there were 5 of everything? So that's why it's like your very being, your external being, your body is marked with 5s to remind you where you came from. And then where you came from will connect you to who you are, and by way of what you're not. You're not any of these sets of 5s. You're the one behind the 5s. So you'd be like, either that or that, whichever way you want. And there are 5 of everything, but you're the one behind those 5. But you don't know that until you connect them. So come along with me and connect these things. Put them on clothespins on a line and look at them like you would do your wash when you're drying it in the sun, and see how everything is connected. I'll give you the father of yoga's hit on that in a second. So there's the 5 pranas. We're calling them the reins to these 5 horses. So I think you get it here. Out there in outer space, including the earth, are these 5 elements. And then next are the 5 senses. Those are back in the subtle body, their origin. And then on the way to the mind, you've got these 5 kinds of life force. Let's call them expulsion, assimilation, aspiration, and pervasion. That is sort of like your breath. It'll expel something, it'll hold, it'll take it back in, it'll take sustenance from what it takes in, then it'll extract what it doesn't want, right? It will exclude everything with the out-breath that's not good for it. Takes in what it needs, breathes out what it doesn't need anymore. So in every breath you've got sign of the 5 pranas working, or this 1 prana and 5 things. That's one of the real reasons why you want to breathe consciously. You don't just want to breathe because some physical regimen of yoga told you to do so, but you want to connect this again to the mind. First as a fact that you do breathe, remember that, then connect it philosophically to all these different tattvas in order to climb this ladder, this inward ascension, back into your true nature, so you can get a view of it. You get the best view from the top rung. From the bottom rungs, you're not seeing anything up there yet, or in there. So, five reins of prana are there, held by the mind. And they're also the reins of tanmatras. So, this is how you can more readily connect the 5 tanmatras to everything. It means that if you go from earth to smell, and then you go from smell to fragrance, if you go from water to taste, you go from taste to flavor. If you go from fire to seeing, you go from seeing to visibility. If If you go from air to feeling, you go from feeling to tangibility. And if you go from ether to hearing, you go from hearing to audibility. You can see there are the senses, and then there's what's operating the senses. And there's a name for what's operating the senses. Call him a god if you want. Call him the god of prana. Because they did deify all of these things and look at them as living gods. So again, you'll understand deity yoga or upasana much better if you study these tattvas and see that there's a living power in all of them, and that these powers are vibrating at a different level of mind. So all the gods and goddesses are back in your mind. There are songs about that in India, which means their powers that we're showing here as 15 of the cosmic principles or tattvas are back in the mind. You see then how amazing the mind is and how important it is to get the mind, as Holy Mother said, as your friend. You need peace of mind first and foremost, my child, she said. So can you just say it, go home and say, okay, I'm going to get peace of mind. Where is it? And then wake up the next morning and say, I finally got it back. Or are you going to find out what is making your mind not peaceful, that you don't know anything that's going on out here because you haven't meditated on anything? You've just taken it all for granted. What if you were to specify each thing as an alambana, as a station for meditation, and just sit and think about it? You think that's kind of cliche nowadays because you've seen it so much in cartoons and various things that the West has put forth, that the yogi will sit there and for a long time and watch the flower bloom. You think that's just kind of some new age fairy silly little thing? Can be, depending on who's doing it. But if you connect it to the divine wisdom, you can see how powerful it is, and that when you see someone like Sri Ramakrishna in Samadhi, he's gathering all the essence from everything, taking it back into his heart and mind, and getting bliss from it. That drove him into Samadhi. That's called knowledge, by the way, true knowledge. And that's a power that's held in every particle. Just like power, physical power is held in atoms, the power of realization is held in these in intellectual particles. In your thoughts, in your higher thoughts particularly, there's more power. There's a lot of power in lower thoughts of evil beings, isn't there? Lots of things go on in the name of power. Diluted power, of course. But then there's this directed power. There's this one-pointed concentration that's going to be released from the atom of intelligence. We call that a Jnana Matra. If you can look at it and put the laser-like concentration of your mind on that particle for long enough, it'll explode and release its power, not outwardly for destruction, inwardly for enlightenment. And this is why thousands of seers have gone into enlightenment, because they've realized Divine Mother power in everything. So here's Holy Mother, back to her, you see, sitting there in this very country that gave us this Adi Daiva Vidya, original divine wisdom, speaking this out to people who have it somewhere in their memory because they're in India, and trying to awaken this in them. For Westerners, because at one time when her name began to become more known, she said to someone, oh, you don't understand, I have many white children too in other countries. So she was already thinking herself across the whole world. She wasn't just the mother of India, she was the mother of the entire universe. So world, India, world, universe, macrocosm, internal macrocosm, she was the mother of all that. I am the mother of all. Whenever you are in trouble or need any help or assistance, just say to yourself, I have a mother, is what she used to say to us. So back to her again, then you can see how all of this is her plan. You see, this isn't something she has to sit down and study anymore. She's born with it. And when she's born with it and she sees people who have forgotten it, she's going to remind them of it. So this is why I'm talking about her emphasis on reincarnation and karma. You'll see the connection in the next chart. Let's try and get to that. So basically when you find yourself through these 15 tattvas, or so, you could call them 20, then you get to the mind as a fourfold component. That's 4. So this is the famous 24 cosmic principles that many of you have heard about, which I've been teaching in SRV for many decades. And there are older and younger versions of this. Basically, that's called Samkhya Yoga. And then you see behind the chariot, behind the whole scene of the Purusha, because that's what we end up with at the top of the chain here. The Purusha is like the Atman, it's like the eternal soul. And all of this that comes out of it is Prakriti. So this is an ancient teaching back in the Gita and before the Gita too, that India has always known, that there's this one unchanging reality called that Purusha or Mahapurusha, and then there's this all the changing varieties of things that emerge from it as emanation via vibration of the word Om, and that's called Prakriti. So Purusha and Prakriti, Shiva and Shakti, Brahman and Shakti, you have all these different designations, important divine couplings that we want to make. And so by the time you have taken all these 24 cosmic principles back into yourself, Holy Mother teaches, then you see yourself as the origin of it all. And you say, oh, I found myself out of Prakriti. I found my way out of Prakriti to myself, Purusha. And the conclusions are going to be 2. 1, I'm not any of that. Number 2, it all came out of me. I can't put it any simpler than that. So if you're tired of the cliches that everything is within you, here's the proof of it. Here's the teaching about it. You don't have to just jump to the chase and say, oh, it's just some sort of fanciful thought someone had. Thousands of seers put this together by coming down the ladder from the Purusha to the element earth and by moving back inside to the Purusha again. Your breath does that, returns to its source. Your body does that in nature. Your thoughts do that when they emanate out of the mind and return to their own dissolution back in the mind. And all of nature comes out of the mind and returns to formlessness. Everything is doing that all the time. And for us to sit back and not take account of it, then do we have any excuse for complaining about our suffering then? Is that we attach ourselves to changing things when we're the unchanging reality? We really don't have a leg to stand on anymore. This is why I'm putting together karma, reincarnation, mantra, and sadhana, practice. This is her way of thinking for people of this day and age. Guru, Brahman, highest meditation, samadhi, those are all her highest secrets. Out here, where the fray is, where people are suffering, where the problems are rising, where the changes are taking place, where people are getting lost, bound, and suffering, these are the teachings that apply to waking the soul up to its predicament in Maya so that it can get free again, like it eternally is free. Bondage is a false superimposition over the self. The self's never bound. So this is how the father of yoga would look at the ancient system of India and say that. How would he say it? By meditating upon the 5 elements, the 5 senses, and the mind, which we just looked at, the hidden truth about objects gets revealed. What is the hidden truth about objects? That they consist of many more things than just a physical appearance. Meditation upon the subtle elements and the sense of I-ness expands thought, awakens wisdom, and tames the ego. You see it up there around Arjuna and Krishna, the ego, the mind, and the intelligence. When you meditate upon all those things, those 15 to 20 or 25 things that fell below it, then you tame the ego, and it opens up to the recognition of the Purusha. Then meditate upon the true individual along with the intelligence, for it delimits the ego and exposes the fount of joy within oneself. The Purusha then transcends the very idea of selfhood and meditates on the awareness of cessation. Thus do the samadhis of knowledge, bliss, and I-ness lead to formlessness. Summating several of Patanjali's sutras in the Raja Yoga Sutras, called Patanjala system, or the Jnana Yoga, the Meditation Yoga. All of this Patanjali concludes in this way. So one thing we probably can't move on without mentioning is that all of this inward dissolution that's going on, sometimes called this dissolution of everything back to the mind and then dissolving the mind, ends in the awareness of cessation. It's a very, very almost Buddhistic statement. You see that everything ceases when you draw it back to yourself, just like deep sleep tonight, or like samadhi to the seer. Everything goes away, as if it never was. And then it appears in a thrice, when the consciousness comes out again. So back to the source, it all disappears. The important teaching about those three words, awareness of cessation, is that there is nothing left when everything ceases but awareness. And that's probably what people don't understand when they get fearful about formlessness, that when everything gets taken away by the one who projected it, that's little o you and little o me. When we projected it all, called life, and then we drew it back into ourselves, called eternal life, that we didn't need to fear anything because awareness itself was in charge of everything. That's the one indestructible underlying principle of everything. Everything else is changing from matter to energy to thought, constantly changing. So what about this underlying essence that doesn't change, even when all changes take place on its surface? It's like an ocean, my teacher said, very still. Then all of a sudden winds come and whip it up, lashes it into many waves. Then a few days later the storm has passed and the ocean is just flat again. Talk to any sailor about that. And under the sun, you see, beautiful, blue, clear, you see, peaceful. So my teacher used to say that too. He'd say, if you live on the surface of the ocean, you get tossed by its waves. But if you dive to the depths of the ocean, then you realize peace, peace, peace. Peace on the external, peace on the internal, and peace at the transcendent level. Here is my conclusion on what was just taught in this modern day and age, in this contemporary time. Meditating with intense focus upon these principles of existence, the seeker defragments the mind and unifies himself with nature. Unification here is not one of identity, but one of connection. That is, oneness with nature would mean his soul is one with birth, decay, death, and this is not the case. The soul is eternal existence. Thus, realizing that all of nature has come out of his mental process via the power of projection, the yogi takes stock of the evolution of nature from gross to subtle, contemplates them, then masters them. In this way, he separates the true self from the apparent self and from nature. And that's called Kaivalya by the father of Samkhya and the father of yoga. That is, Lord Kapila and Lord Patanjali. So that is a good piece of time we took. You can see that Holy Mother's very appearance there in the land of India, and then her increasing notoriety as word about her presence on earth began to leak out of India over its borders, particularly with the coming of Swami Vivekananda to the West. Divine Mother power was being released from the source of India into the other countries of the world. Here we are in the third millennium now. Here we are contemplating her great teachings. Even that expanding on into the future, having recorded some of these teachings. So That's why we like to sing. We should probably say something because she loved this music so much. Sharade, oh Sharade, Vikya Vinashane, Sharade, Brahma Sanatani, Sharade, Karuna Rupini, Sharade, Prema Swarupini, Swarade, Namo Narayani, Sharade. So, Holy Mother, you are Vikya Vinashane, the destroyer of all obstacles. Holy Mother, Sri Sharda Devi, you are the eternal principle of Brahman, Brahman Sanatani. O Divine Mother, you are the essence of ecstatic love, Prema Swarupini. And Holy Mother, you are the savior of the fallen and the lowly ones, Patita Pavani. Holy Mother, you are the very essence of compassion for all living beings. Salutations to Thee, O Divine Mother of the Universe. This can be put into another context then, which makes her teachings even clearer. And it brings in this principle then of embodiment, which no doubt is a relative truth, because soul's never born, soul never dies. You must have heard that if you've been familiar with the teachings of Advaita Vedanta. But everything gets projected from the mind. It doesn't get created, it gets projected, number one. And number two, when the mind does its projecting power, it's rather dreamlike, and it projects things like 24 cosmic principles that we just seen, which themselves are not the self, so they change, but the self acts as witness to all that. So without those teachings well established in our knowing minds, and we still have inquiring minds at the same time, then we begin to apply this 24 cosmic principle teaching to the principle of embodiment. So this chart, called the process of embodiment, takes some of her sayings directly that she said to people when she was in the body, and that got spread around through various books written about her, because people, like my teacher Swami Sheshanand, got so informed and so blessed by her. I'll show you maybe next week some teachings of Swami Sheshananda on Holy Mother, whom he took as his chosen ideal. So this chart here, called Process of Embodiment, takes all of these cosmic principles that we just looked at and puts them into three bodies, or also three worlds. So this is an important addition to this sets of fives, is that they fall into three divisions all the time, like your breath does. In breath, held breath, out breath. Like your waking, dreaming, and deep sleep state falls into three movements at night. The worlds also fall into outer, inner, and transcendent. The mind falls into gross, subtle, and causal. And so all of these are ready wisdom for a knower of Brahman like Holy Mother. And she's ready to explain this to you if you will take the time to sit, hear it, contemplate it, meditate on it, and realize it. Shravana Manana Nidijasana. So this is the ancient way of India. It's the 1, 2, 3 punch that puts ignorance to death. So when you want to apply or connect again or integrate these great teachings of the 24 cosmic principles into threes, then this is how it looks. You can see that on the right-hand side of the chart is a listing of the immanent world. And the physical body and the primal body fall into that. So her quote about that, when she would teach, she would say, people with desires take their births again and again. Afterwards they go on to other planes and experience pleasures and pain in the course of time and are then born again in human form. So this is the immanent world. So if we wanted to incorporate what we just looked at, they go to these different worlds, which are a combination of what? 5 akashas, consisting then of air, fire, water, and earth, enjoyed through desire by what? The 5 senses of seeing, tasting, touching, hearing, and smelling. You see how it goes. How you then begin to make sense out of your physical birth and your life force, and how all of these, as the soul experiences and takes them on, forms the desire to go back to earth. Oh, I think I want some more of that. And so it will return to earth again as long as it hasn't satisfied its desire for objects through the 5 senses. Now, this is not necessarily a good thing. Life is not necessarily a good thing when you look at it via attachment, bondage, suffering, birth, old age, decay, death, the 5 passions, lust, anger, greed, envy, jealousy, the 8 fetters, shame, regret, fear, doubt. I could go on. The 9 antarayas, the 5 kleshas of ignorance, attachment, clinging to life, fear of death. Is that a good life when all of those things are accompanying it? So you have to then, with a sobering look at everything that the mind has projected, take responsibility for that, and then see how your physical body is moving through this, itself also a projection of your internal mind, your internal body. So this is how the immanent world has come out of the subtle world, transcendent world. Transcendent because you can't see it on earth here. So that's next to it. We're looking at, again, the middle of the chart here, at the way these 24 cosmic principles can be associated with and connected to rebirth and karma according to her teachings. So you see the transcendent world, you've gone from the physical body and the primal body to the subtle body and the causal body. And she says about this, all people, excepting some highly advanced souls, live in a spirit body for a year after death. The spirit body can be likened to a body made of air. That's, of course, metaphoric. So it's invisible, in other words, and it moves with this life force that you cannot see. Like the angelic worlds, the realm of the celestials, the realm of the asuras, the realm of the gods and goddesses. These are all worlds back inside, made of subtler versions of air, earth, fire, water, and ether, and tasting, touching, hearing, smelling, and seeing, and thinking, intelligence, ego, and so forth. These all have their subtler versions back in the subtle world. It's called the Sukshma Sharira. So the Karna Sharira, the causal body, is out. The Sukshma Sharira is the subtle body within, which equates to the mind. And the Stula Sharira was that immanent world which you had a physical body in. So that's all made of gross things, the word gross meaning physical, where everything is congealed into substances, like with the 5 elements. So she's talking about moving from the immanent world and then passing from the body, either taking birth again and again back here because of unresolved karmas, or if you're a highly advanced soul, you can move into your causal body and take up a position there. If we went looking for some of the great souls, they'd be holding a causal body. The ancestors, maybe the gods and goddesses holding subtle bodies in their particular inner self, their inner worlds, inner realms. They're called lokas or bardos sometimes, and like I said, akashas. So let's move in that direction toward the absolute world, or the Atman. About that she says, and these are quotes straight from her about these worlds, only those who belong to a high spiritual category can be renunciates and gain liberation from all kinds of fetters. I bless you so that you may attain liberation in this life. Birth and death are extremely painful. May you not suffer them anymore. So here's her great compassion showing up. And her quotes about each level of body and world. So this is why I say she was here to try and remind us that there's more than just this physical world and this physical body. And therefore we would have to look into the origins of external things, connect them to subtle things, and then not stop there, but connect those subtle things to the ultimate cause, to causal things. I can show you a quick chart on that today if we have the time. So you can see that she had sayings that she would say, simple sayings that she would give to people who had fallen into some sort of confusion about their true being and had taken the body and the senses to be real and therefore stuck in the physical world, having rebirths again and again due to their desires. So this is one of the things she put her magnificent mind upon there in India, and it began then to spread out from there with Swami Vivekananda's coming to the West in 1893 and bringing the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother with him. Having looked at the connection between 24 cosmic principles and 3 bodies and 3 worlds, now I hope that's all clear to you, or you can go back and continue to contemplate them all as alambanas and connect them yourself inside of your own mind. Then let's look at these 2 quotes at the top that give us even a greater hint of this process of embodiment that people are going through amidst the worlds made of these tattvas that have all come out of the mind's thinking process. She says, after a birth in the human body, some attain salvation in this life, whereas others may take inferior births to reap the results of their karmas. Not everyone can be free from desire. This creation is going on because all cannot be free from desires. However, that indeed is the last birth in which one gets rid of desires completely. One will not have to come again. It's all couched or put in such an atmosphere that coming back to earth is not what you want to do, isn't it? So there is a way to transcend life in the physical body. Let's say you're having a very fine life, thank you very much. And if rebirth is good, because I've heard this before, rebirth is good because I get to come back and do this all again. So there's no guaranteeing, just like there's no guaranteeing that you're having a good day today, so you're going to have a good day tomorrow. That's probably usually not the case, even if you're rich, we hear. So problems come. So in that same way, you have this lifetime-to-lifetime scenario, which in one lifetime your karmas, your good karmas are showing. And we could probably look at some of those teachings in this series of classes too. And then the next lifetime it's not so positive. And she used to give teachings about that too. She said, when a time comes, a man is given all the propensities for doing good actions and enjoying life. Another time comes, all of a sudden he's giving all the propensities to doing evil actions and suffering evil karma. So this is the thing about the changing nature of change itself in Maya, is that you cannot count on anything. Like, I remember one Swami told me, if I had $1 million, I would, in a dream one night, and I'd go put it in a dream bank. It's pretty highly unlikely I would go back the next night and it would still be there. So he said, give me $1 million out here, I'll put it in the bank up the street. It's pretty likely that it will be there tomorrow, as long as things don't fall apart here. So in that way, you cannot count on things like another happy lifetime, another good day, or your health maintaining itself all the way into your 70s or 80s or 90s, like that Chinese ideal. So basically you want to live a long, prosperous, and healthy life, eating good foods on gold plates with your grandchildren. That's a prayer, sometimes they say, that ensures that you get all three of those good things. So in that way, she's talking here about the last birth as a very positive thing, and getting rid of all your desires as a high attainment. And otherwise, that remains to be seen for the soul. Again, she would say, many a time a man takes birth and passes again and again in a certain family due to his karma. But one should not blame God for this. Everyone reaps the effects of their own individual actions. And though one might have to take on a new body again, one does not necessarily lose spiritual consciousness if one retains one's karmic merits from previous births. So she was then here today on earth, in this lifetime, in this age that she lived, to remind us of this. So she's telling us there's a higher ideal of transcending human life and all of its vagaries and vicissitudes, as she would say. And then there's also this danger of falling into more reverse in suffering. Then there's a way of practicing. This leads us to that idea of mantra and sadhana, which we'll get into next week, that she prescribed. There's a way of practicing and remembering that one is on this inner ascension ladder, and to keep one's wisdom well informed, keep one's mind from getting fragmented, to keep it one-pointed, keep one's intelligence honed, and keep one's body and breath flowing. Apiyantu mamangani vak pranaschakshu shrotra bam indriyani chasarvani. May our body experience great health, may our life force flow unimpeded, and may our mind expand in its capacity to know the Atman, to know ourself. So you can't look at a teaching like this and cry pessimism, see, because these very teachings then go to the highest of all attainments in spirituality. They don't default back to the earth and take the earth as some sort of refuge, when that's all changing Maya. That's all getting tossed by the waves of change, which people come and go through. So she's giving us this ideal to rise to, and saying that even if one does fall into another body, another birth, one doesn't necessarily have to lose the merits that they accumulated in this lifetime. So she's definitely advising us to do our spiritual practices, and, as to borrow a teaching from Jesus, store up your fruits in heaven. You can't store them up here on earth. You won't find that $1 million in a bank tomorrow. So, store them up in heaven. Store them up in heaven means in yourself, back where they exist, back where you always have them, back where you never have the fear of losing them, you see. So her teaching's both practical and ultimate. That just leaves the bottom of this chart in a few minutes, Jeff, to finish it. You can see that there are all these very things we studied put in a different list, right under these three bodies. So physical body and the primal body, which is the life force body, consist of 5 elements. The physical body composed of marrow, bones, fat, flesh, blood, skin, nails, etc. and the 5 organs of action: speaking, handling, locomotion, excretion, and procreation. That falls nicely under the heading of the physical body. Do I want to take another one of those on after living once? We'll talk about that when we find out her teachings on mantra, how to purify the senses in the body, and then how to do sadhana to purify the mind. Those are all things that she talked about. Pure mind was one of the main teachings that she loved. Chit Shuddhi, it's called. Let's look at the constituents as they fall under this list, under the subtle body. Intellect, ego, thought, mind. That's that chariot we looked at in the last chart. Then the 5 subtle elements of audibility, tangibility, visibility, flavor, and odor, which are the fathers of your 5 sense functions of tasting, touching, hearing, seeing, and smelling. That's where they came from. In other words, everything had a subtle source. So you couldn't hear something and just say, the ear is real. There's, something in the ear that's hearing, and there's something in the inner ear, behind the outer ear, that's hearing deeper. That's called ignorance, knowledge, and wisdom. You see, the ear can tune into all of those. And we know that they use the eye that way. The 2 outer eyes looking out towards the sense objects. And they're defective because they go blind. Prana leaks out of them, so forth. But then there's this inner eye, or there's these. Let's go first to the dream sense eyes. In a dream, I have eyes too, and I see inwardly. Then let's go beyond that to the 3rd eye, what they call the Jnana Chakshu, the eye of wisdom. So you've got 3 sets of eyes there, 3 sets of seeing. So you're going to have to know about visibility if you want to take the English word for it, because there's Sanskrit words for it which immediately call up these teachings. But if you have to use the English word, then you're going to have to meditate on visibility, what it means. Does it only mean seeing out? Or do I also see in tonight? And do I also see beyond when my intellect gets more refined? I even see beyond wisdom and see the Lord face to face. So you can see, take any one of these and start thinking about it like that, how powerful it is. And this is a part of your subtle body. These are where the 5 senses came from. Then the 5 senses of knowledge are smelling, tasting, seeing, feeling, and hearing. And then the 5 modes of life force we looked at already. Inhalation, exhalation, circulation, ascendancy, and digestive or distributive. See, they're giving a little bit different words than back here on the chariot chart. So we could see what these different 5 movements of life force are doing in our lungs, in our body, and in our nadis. And we'll connect those deeper, as I said earlier in class, to Shakti power, who runs them all. Now let's look at the causal body on the far left. Very difficult to find anything about it. It's listed, called the Karana Sharira. So it's the causal body where all of these things from the subtle body came from, and then from the subtle body, all the things in the gross body came from that. So the causal body then will hold all of the things in the gross and subtle body in potential. Unmanifested prakriti, sometimes they call that. It holds it all back in seeds in your causal body. The Karana Sharira. It's very powerful teaching that everything does really exist back inside of you. Not just your Atman, which exists at all time, but all these things that are evolving and getting involved, that are getting solidified and then dissolved, are also back inside of you. And a witness or a power, as we said, that's operating them all. So causal body, what can we say about it? It's undifferentiated. By the time you go into deep sleep tonight, then what are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are you tasting? What are you smelling? And so forth. Where's your ego, even in deep sleep? Who you thought you were. And also who I am. Where did that go? That is, I can't find my Atman in deep sleep either, you see. So everything has gone there into an undifferentiated state. And it's peace, peace, peace you're getting there, but not samadhi. The intellect ceases to vibrate, and that can be a very good thing, as we're talking about things that apparently seem good and which aren't, and things that sound frightening but actually are very ennobling. The intellect ceases to vibrate there. No thoughts, in other words. Mind exists in a subtle state, and these three gunas called tamas, rajas, and sattva exist in equilibrium. So here you're also finding such things as the powerful gunas exist back inside of you too. And they break into disequilibrium, and there's life. And then you take them back into disequilibrium, back into unmanifested prakriti, and there's no movement anymore, no thought. All of these, then, these first four things connect. So they liken it to the condition of deep sleep. Shushupti is a beautiful word in Sanskrit. Shushupti is deep sleep. Swapnas and dream, and jagatas and waking. So you're going from waking to dream to deep sleep when everything is completely withdrawn. Sometimes they call that dissolved, or no mind. Then you see that that's a condition of deep sleep. They also call it symbolically nidra samadhi. When I go to bed at night and before I fall asleep, I always worship Nidra Devi. You see, I've sung about her in a couple hymns. So the mother of sleep, the mother of deep sleep. May she usher us into realization and vision of the inner light. The causal body here, another beautiful fact about it, it pre-exists the physical worlds. And it is the cause of the gross and subtle bodies. I want to leave you with that, to contemplate that if you're looking at things now that you know everything that you're not, or everything that has come out of you, if you can meditate upon all those and bring them to a center or to a point, that this would be a good place to put them, back here in the house of the body-mind mechanism. Put them all back there in the center of that house. That this causal body, which is conditioned like deep sleep, pre-exists the physical worlds. The physical worlds came after. Anterior to life and mind is yourself. And it's the cause of these other bodies, gross and subtle. You know, you could also extend it to say it's also the cause of the physical universe and the heavens, if you think about that. Because the gross body exists in the physical worlds, in the physical universe, but the subtle body exists in the heavens. So heaven, the kingdom of heaven is within you. Does it sound familiar? So basically, all of those two bodies, earth and heavens, and all that they consist of, are stored in your causal body, and you're the witness of that, or that's the ideal. Hopefully you will become the witness of that. So we salute Holy Mother at that time, and we sing Prakritim Paramam Abhayam Vadadam Narupadaram Janatapaharam Sharanagata Sevika Toshakarim Pranamami Param Jananim Jagatam Jananim Sharadam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Madho Padme Tvaya Shritva Pranamami Mahur Mahur Pranamami Mahur Mahur. O Ramakrishna, teacher of all, O Sharda, goddess divine, in bosom holding those lotus feet, salutations to both ever be of mine. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, and may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat.